Please welcome our panelists. Luis Alberto Moreno, the President of the Inter-American Development Bank. Precious Moloi-Motsepe, the co-founder and CEO of the Motsepe Foundation. Solver Fohla Mouftaou, the Managing Director of Greenkeeper Africa. And our moderator, Stephanie Mehta.
Thanks, everyone. The previous panel with Joy, Mark, and Ala talked a lot about the importance of local communities and the need for local communities to engage in this conversation around technology. We're going to keep that conversation going a little bit with this particular panel, looking at how we can support local innovation ecosystems around the world to produce solutions that can scale to tackle some of these issues of inequality and to help local communities thrive. This is an amazing panel. I want to start with Fohla, who at Greenkeeper Africa has built a business that uses an invasive weed, water hyacinth, to create an innovative fiber that absorbs oil spills. I mean, this is an incredible story. Can you just tell us a little bit about how you came up with this innovation and how you were able to turn it into a business, to commercialize it?
Thank you. First, it can look like one product, one idea, but it's actually a series of a lot of ideas that are put together in order to be able to propose this product to the clients. Because our raw material is an invasive weed, invasive plant that exists in a certain region of my country, and this is a remote place. So
your country is Benin?
My country is Republic of Benin, yeah. And so whatever you do, even if your end idea is very bright and smart, you have to start with the very beginning, how you are going to harvest the plant, who is going to benefit, who is going to work with you at the very beginning, how you're going to transport the raw material, because the riparian cities and the lake channels and area is difficult to access. How you're going to set up your plant in this middle, in the middle of this region, how you're going to create the machine, how you're going to sell the product. So it's really, we started as a teamwork. It was the idea of one of the founders. It was the ideas of the teams that were put together. It was the resilience of all the team working together, fighting against failures, things that were not working. We had many challenges. But this is, now we created Greenkeeper Africa in 2014, so it's 5 years now. And we have been one after the other climbing the steps, one by one. Sometimes we were going down the steps and not feeling discouraged and keeping on trying. But today, I'm very proud to say that we are able to produce this fiber that has amazing capacity to absorb all types of oil or hydrocarbons in general, and that we had certified this fiber in Europe, that we are selling this fiber in different countries in Africa and also in Europe. But there is still a long way to go because we have to face client new feedback that we have to take into account in order to improve the product and to be able to answer better to the needs of that they are facing, because we are a B2B market, so we are talking with industries, and in my country and in West Africa in general, the industries are growing fast, and the waste management is certainly not their first concern, and we have to work not only to make them convinced that they have to take that into account from the very beginning, but we also, behind that, have to convince them that the product that we are proposing is actually exactly what they need. And together with this product, we are trying to propose to them an end-to-end solution in order to recycle the waste behind that.
I want to come back a little bit to the growth of the business and how you find new markets and continue to expand, thereby creating jobs. Precious, at your foundation, job creation and education are central to your mission. Can you talk a little bit about what you found most effective, and particularly the ways you've been able to leverage the technology community or the innovation community to help with that goal?
Well, thank you. I'm really excited to be here, and I've been here for the past weekend, and I see the Solve team has brought out the sun, which is really fantastic. So thank you very much for that. I'm a medical doctor by training, but my husband and I started a family foundation in '94 to help solve the problems in South Africa, on the continent and globally. We did this because we felt that we were very fortunate. We grew up in the days when we had apartheid policies in South Africa. And for young women or young girls like myself, there were not many opportunities. We also realized that we were helped a lot along our way by many people in our communities, our parents and teachers, and the whole community as a whole. But I think the one thing that really spurred us on to go into wanting to give back was when Nelson Mandela, the former president of South Africa, came out of jail, and he urged all of us to try and build South Africa, bring back white and black communities together, focus on the poor and marginalized communities in South Africa. And he was very passionate about education. So we started the foundation. Initially, it was just a charitable giving that we did. But when we joined the Giving Pledge, we decided to structure our foundation and focus a lot on education. So we give bursaries to students in South Africa who wish to study further at university levels, particularly students who want to study in the STEM fields. And my personal passion is to ensure that we can bring young girls to be inspired and learn more about technology and take up studies in STEM. Particularly because as an African continent, we have very high unemployment, especially in young people. We are a growing and will be soon a very youthful continent. So we try and focus on ensuring that we can encourage young people to go into areas of study where there will be growth in the economy and there will be hiring. Our focus as a foundation and our philosophy is that we want to ensure that we can help people help themselves become sustainable. We always talk about giving a hand up, not a hand out. Our focus a lot is in education, but we do other things that I'll tell you about later.
And just very quickly, how have you been able to scale that program? How have you been able to get more students, and particularly more girls, to be interested in participating in the educational system and to go after STEM careers?
That's really interesting. I was sitting in the crowd and looking at your Solve team that went on stage, and I was quickly trying to count how many girls were in that team. And there's quite a lot. That's very impressive, so well done with that. What we do at the foundation, we start at high schools where we recruit young girls and expose them to others at universities or who are already working so that they can see themselves in these people, see themselves in the jobs of tomorrow. Mentorship is very important in how we help to interest many young people in the sectors. But I think you asked a question about localization and how we apply innovation locally. I'll tell you a story about a young girl from one of the rural communities. Our bursaries are mainly focused in children in very underserved communities, poor communities. And this young girl went to university, and for the first time, she had to do her research work through internet, and also present her work on using computers. And she had never, ever been exposed to using computers before. But she worked so hard, and she presented her work eventually, using computers. She taught herself how to use a computer, and this is at university level. But she was inspired to then raise funds, came to us as a foundation, raise funds and buy computers, she went back into her community and she started teaching other young girls and young people, in general, on how to use computers in rural communities. So we do a little, but we hope that the people will also emulate and expand and help others in the community.
It's very inspiring. Luis, before I get to a question for you, I just want to tell the audience a little bit about the Inter-American Development Bank, which you lead, in case people are not familiar with it. It's an organization that works to improve the lives of people in Latin America and the Caribbean through financial and technical support focused on social and economic inclusion, productivity, and innovation. So very, very much on point for the conversation today. I would love to hear a little bit about how your organization helps to foster innovation and particularly digital transformation in your region.
Well, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to share the floor with both Precious and with Fohla and learning what they have done, and really the whole SOLVE teams. We are basically a development bank, and as a development bank, we more and more are looking at ways of how to use technology to empower people, and more importantly, that transition that is so central in where you have societies that are in the 21st century and governments that at best are in the 20th, perhaps 19th or 18th century, depending. And so that transit is fundamental, not only to achieve better competitiveness, but something that is breaking very quickly, which is trust in government. And to create that trust in government, you got to really be able to have empowered governments for empowered citizens. And if there is a mismatch there, you start to see all the breakdowns that we see today. So what are the kinds of things that we do? We work, for instance, a lot with the MIT Media Lab in doing proofs of concept around things like electronic single windows. This is something where you get all of the agents of the state, from the customs to the agriculture, or APHIS, as you call it in the United States, and a variety of agencies that come together and somehow look at products coming in or out of a country. Where you do it through electronic single windows, you automatically facilitate the movement of products, and also you have a traceability for whatever program that you're doing in this space. Equally, one of the things that I'm most impressed with is the notion of corruption today, and technology clearly is a way to put a lot of light on actions of government. And there's always been corruption in our societies for centuries, but the question today is not only the white-collar corruption that gets a lot of attention, but that corruption that affects everyday citizens. And here I refer to, we've done studies that demonstrate that an average Latin American citizen spends close to 6 or 7 days of work of the year just standing in line to get something like a driver's license or a passport or whatever government type of identity and or need to get a government service. There's many ways to do this, for instance, today online, and ways to accelerate the process and not have to repeat the set of documents that you take to one agency and then repeat to another. How do you create, therefore, the back room and the back office of these processes and use technology to better able to serve people and basically do this process together? We've done things, for instance, in being able to map the way royalties are spent in something that, if I was talking about in the case of natural resources, where there's a lot of royalties coming to governments, and how to map the way those royalties are spent and or invested, and where every citizen can do it, and you can do it with a development that we did where anybody can load up and say this is not happening, or a citizen can look at how government spending is taking place. Or on jobs, especially jobs for women, as Precious was mentioning. We found, for instance, a fascinating program that we funded called Laboratorio. This was basically started by 2 SOLVE type of women that, like many of the ones that we see here, and they noticed that there was a huge gap in the number of women ages 19 to 22 in the middle income, low income kinds of groups, that they were not getting jobs. And the jobs gap that existed was largely related to the fact that they didn't have any kind of skills to do code, for instance. So they started, a process by which they teach women to write code. And eventually, they are being able to find very well-paying jobs in an area where before, in these countries, they started in Peru, and today it's in over 5 different countries across Latin America. And finally, I mean, I could go on and on giving you example, but one of them, which is the biggest problem that we have today, is the future of jobs. One of the issues of the futures of jobs is that if you look, there's a huge skills gap. You can go to corporations and find out that they're not being able to fill only 1 out of 2 jobs that they need. So how do you begin to address that mismatch? So using blockchain both on the supply side and on the demand side to help develop a better connectivity between what academia is doing, what vocational career training is taking place, and therefore field jobs. So these are the kinds of things that we have been working on and do it in a variety of countries. And there's huge amount of space to work on these very issues.
I'm going to ask a question about a key factor to scaling, and Fohla, I'll ask you the same question. Luis, how important is money to getting those projects that you've cited to be able to scale? How, for those 2 women who started the Coding Academy, do they need, is money the gating factor to turning that into a nationwide program or a region-wide program? Or are there other things that are at play in terms of trying to get these technologically driven solutions to reach more people?
So I've seen an evolution in Latin America that fundamentally rests on connectivity. We all have cell phones. The numbers of smartphones around there, I mean, in Latin America, the cell phone penetration is one of the highest in the emerging world. We love to talk. Latinos love to talk. So they have more than 1 phone. But the question is, do you have enough smartphones? And if you see the graph of the speed with which smartphones are growing, today it's about 50% of the population. That essentially gives you another kind of connectivity. And as that connectivity takes place, it is these platforms that are having more and more success. And yes, money is a factor, but the size of the pie is growing. And as the size of the pie grows, there is easier ways to basically make more marketable some of these applications that otherwise were limited in the kind of scope that they have. But money will be a factor, but I think increasingly it is also the capacity to have that connectivity to be able to reach not millions, but hundreds of millions of people.
Fohla, what do you see in West Africa? What do innovators need in order to scale?
Many things, but I might not be speaking of the same level. If I take it ground-based, when you are a leader and you want to start a startup or a company, of course money is important, but what is more important is how you are going to spend it. We've started Greenkeeper Africa with something like $5,000. And so it's more the way we spent this $5,000 at the very beginning that make us able to reach a certain level that we could demonstrate that with this 5,000, this is what we have done. That raised interest of people around saying, oh, this is interesting. Can you do more with a little bit more? And this is step by step how we succeeded in solving the money issue. But in terms of impact and scale, I would like to reach what Dr. Precious was saying about inspiring other people, and about the domino effect. I think that what we do in Greenkeeper Africa, of course, concern fiber, industrial pollution, how to tackle invasive species. But the process that we use, the economic model that we try to put in place, also is a learning that can help other company, maybe other leader, create new companies in other domain, in other countries. And this domino effect is very important to address these overwhelming challenges that I can see, especially in West Africa. I cannot do everything, of course, and I just hope that by communicating and speaking out about what I do, some people will listen, maybe will catch up with me and say, okay, can we work a little bit together, show what you have done.
Can I just add that I think collaborations are very important also, and I hope the three of us after this we can, talk a little bit in the back. We've got an entrepreneur, and a development bank financier, and somebody who works in philanthropy.
Yeah.
So those collaborations are very important, and I think what MIT does in bringing solvers together like this and expose them to business and government plays a very, very important role in helping them to scale.
Precious, a similar question is what I asked Luis and Fohla for you. South Africa is undergoing an incredible explosion in entrepreneurial activity. What is your perspective from where you sit on how that entrepreneurial activity is sustained and grows?
I think it's not just South Africa where there's huge activity of entrepreneurs. I mean, all over the continent, particularly in tech, because we have realized that for Africa to really leapfrog and have sustainable development, technology is going to play a very, very important role. What we do at the foundation has been in supporting entrepreneurs, particularly around, I think it's been said about, the lack of access to finance. So we do assist with finance for entrepreneurs. But the big part of what we do has been, we support a social entrepreneurship program in partnership with the Schwab Foundation of the World Economic Forum. And we provide these entrepreneurs, again, very much like MIT, with opportunities to meet with people that can help them scale. We have an executive education program that these entrepreneurs also get to go through and learn more about how to run their businesses, how to scale their businesses, and very importantly, learn about themselves and what they actually ultimately want out of the work that they do. And that is on the social entrepreneurship side. Some of our social entrepreneurs have done truly amazing programs. We have, for instance, in Rwanda, social entrepreneurs who have used drone technology to transport blood samples and medication to areas in Rwanda, in rural, remote areas that are not easily accessed, through roads. In South Africa, we have a social entrepreneur who has used vinegar, household vinegar, to test women who might have cervical cancer. It's such a very simple and very easily used method. It does not require somebody who's trained as a doctor. It can be done by a nurse. But it is so life-saving because we're able to pick up cancer from in the cervix before it becomes cancerous. So I think supporting entrepreneurs through either funding or connecting them with people that can assist them to help them scale is one area where we as philanthropists come in very handy. But just lastly, the other area is because our capital, we can take risk with our capital. So we often can explore small innovations, and from that bring out data and prove it to work. If it does, then we can partner with government or private sector so that they can scale such programs. An example of this is the Gender Responsive Budgeting Initiative that we introduced in South Africa.
Luis, you spoke a little bit about the role that technology can play in eliminating waste, in enhancing trust between individuals and institutions. But your bank has also explored the issue of the ways that technology might disrupt workforces. What have you found in your research, and are you net optimistic about the role that technology will play in enhancing the workforce, or are you worried that there will be net job losses?
Well, clearly this is an extremely important question, not only for emerging countries, but especially for developed countries, where the speed with which this has happened is much faster than in emerging countries because of gaps of connectivity. But there's also an issue that is central, and you see it in Africa, where you have a huge demographic bonus. The average age of people in Africa is probably around, depending on the country, anywhere from 21 to 26, 27 years old. In Latin America, it's different. It's around 28 now. But the more interesting thing is this. All the advances of medicine have meant that people live longer. And our economies, those of Africa and Latin America, have largely grown because of the huge amounts of people entering the workforce. So it was people that were driving growth as opposed to productivity that has been basically stagnant for many years. And I give you an example. If you look at the numbers, to go from 10% of the population to 24% of the population above 65, it took countries in Europe or the United States close to 50 years. It's going to take about a third of that for countries in Latin America, and I'm sure that is equally the case in Africa. So that means that you're going to have this huge challenge of how to begin to rethink your workforce and what to do. And I think, if anything, technology, probably, as I heard it said the other day, is perhaps the best way to put it, is that our parents perhaps had 3 jobs in their lifetime. We probably have 6 or 7, and our children will have 6 or 7 at the same time. So the notion of fracturing the way we work is going to be entirely different. And a lot of that is the result of technology. And what are the skills that we're going to need? I think that's a big question, not only for governments, for individuals, but especially for educational institutions. Because more and more, the traditional education as we know it is going to have to be changing very quickly, because it's very clear a student that is privileged to come to a university like MIT, in his freshman year, the skills that he would have had when he finishes as a senior are going to be very different. So those set of mismatches are going to be central, and the question is, how quickly can people adapt? And this, to me, is the single most important question, is that capacity to adapt to the changing times that we're in and be able to, be able to enhance and be able to work with new technologies every day.
Well, the ability to adapt is something that I think is this change is the only constant, and you need to be able to constantly address it. What an incredible conversation. We talked about connectivity, we talked about education, we talked about collaboration. Please join me in thanking our panelists, and thank you for helping us kick off Solve.
Thank you.